Thank you, Alvaro. And welcome to everyone to this exciting meeting for Men for Inclusion. I'm John Terry, and amongst other roles, I'm a board member of the Diversity Project, and I'm delighted to be the moderator of this session on a topic that is extremely close to my heart. Over the last few years, many firms have put equality, and in particular gender equality, at the center of their efforts to create more diverse workforces and inclusive workplaces. However, and it's a big however, there is no doubt there is still a long way to go before we can all say that industry truly provides fair opportunities for women and those from diverse backgrounds. It is a sad fact that men dominate leadership positions and, more critically, decision-making roles across industry. Is it possible to drive greater equality without men playing a full and active role? I don't think so. And how can men be more effective in supporting the equality agenda? It seems to me that the enormous additional focus on equality over the last few years, be that Black Lives Matter, the Me Too campaign, or the recent and ongoing focus and very worryingly needed on the safety of women, this is exactly the right time for men to step up and also be supported to be able to do so, to be more effective allies for inclusion. So I'm delighted to moderate this Men for Inclusion meeting, which is focused on how men can do exactly that, be more effective allies and be supported to be so. Rather than me spend a long time introducing each of the speakers and then founders for Men for Inclusion, I will ask Gary, Mark, Brian, and Jill to do so themselves. Gary, if we can start with you. Of course, JP Morgan, you founded their successful Male Allies Network, which is incredibly interesting. Could you say a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, John. Morning, everyone. So yes, Gary Ford. As you can tell, my background is financial services, particularly IT. More than 30 years experience. And I spent 24 years at JP Morgan up until the beginning of last year. And I was a managing director there within the global technology division. And one of the things I was part of, and it was incredibly exciting, was we formed a Male Allies program for women in technology. Technology in particular has a challenge with gender equality. Typically less than 20% of the workforce in that sector are women. And we noticed that, that there was a lot of issues with the experiences of the women working in our team. So we formed a Male Allies program. We rolled it out across, pretty much all of the 50,000 technologists in the firm, and eventually it was adopted across the Women on the Move group, so effectively for the whole of the organisation. Subsequently, the person I co-founded with, a guy called Stephen Kosh, we got together to write a book about our experience. We were luckily joined by Jill, who will add to this in a few seconds. So we wrote a book called The Accidental Sexist, which will be published recently, but it's about our experience of trying to engage men on the subject. I am now an IT consultant. I also, I guess, am a D&I consultant as well. So I try to merge those two things together. So that's me.
Thank you, Gary. That's great. Thank you. And Mark, of course, you are the CEO of E2W and one of the most vocal supporters of equality and men's role in equality as well. Could you say a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, John. Hi, everybody, welcome. Yeah, listen, for the last 20 years, I've run E2W, which is dedicated and focused to supporting women to succeed and flourish in their financial services careers. During that time, I've become an increasingly passionate supporter of D&I. And in particular, the benefits of diversity and inclusion to men. It gives us all the men on the call, we've all benefited from D&I. It's given us more choice. It's given us more opportunity, both in the home and the office. We can be who we are today. We don't need to abide by stereotypes. We can follow our own paths. We're no longer constrained or held back, but we need to accelerate towards the finishing line. The end of this journey is in sight, but we need to do it hand in hand. We need to do this hand in hand with women and with other minority groups, because that's what D&I is all about.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. And Brian, if we can turn to you. I mean, at Amazon, you've delivered many male allyship workshops and been heavily involved in this whole area. Be interesting if you could just share a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so Brian Ballantyne, good to meet you all. I've been at Amazon 8 years, previously Vodafone for about 12 years. Always in business roles, product management, procurement, commercial finance, but always on the side was working in diversity and inclusion, something that I cared about. As you say, John, I've run male ally workshops in Europe and America, and I've been involved in setting up various groups to support women and the LGBTQ area and other areas. I published a book a couple of years ago called Confessions of a Working Father. So this was a way of trying to, highlight, the role of dads and, getting more equality and a level playing field for, parental rights. I think that, and as you do that for men, I think that levels the playing field for women as well. So really good to meet you all today and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. And last but absolutely certainly not least, I say Dr. Jill, but it's the first time and only time I'm going to say Dr. Jill Armstrong. So Jill, I mean, you have done a lot of research in this whole area of men's role in inclusion, and you've taken that further forward. If you could just spend a little time chatting about yourself, that'd be great.
Hello, nice to meet everybody. Yes, I've led a research initiative at Cambridge at Murray Edwards College, which used to be Newhall for anyone who doesn't know that they changed the brand a few years ago, on what men saw about what women experience in terms of extra challenges to everyday inclusion. And like many women, I had no idea until I started this about the extent of the challenge faced by women, and also particularly women of colour, because of accidental sexism and accidental racism. And I realised that women rarely talk about this amongst themselves also, because the smaller things like being interrupted all the time or having to justify your experience more than men do. I say smaller things, they're actually quite big things. They're the kind of things that women often assume, if it does happen to them, that actually it's about their relationship with their boss. It's just them. It's not about women in general. And because women haven't talked about it much, a lot of men haven't heard too much about this either. So actually it was a surprise to me, and I think it's a surprise to many men, because we all support diversity and inclusion, and most of us think we're absolutely meritocratic in the way we deal with people. It's a surprise that the way that these issues creep out because we are unconsciously biased in very many ways. So the other thing is, I am one of the women on Men for Inclusion, alongside Louisa and Tracy, who are on the call this morning, who are on the advisory board, because that denotes that what we want to do is help men work with women. What the last thing we want is men working on women's behalf. So I think it's quite important to say that.
Thank you. I massively underline that last point you made, Jill, as well. Okay, so we're going to get started. We really want this session to be interactive, which is one of the reasons why this is a meeting and not a webinar, so we can see lots of your faces, which is great. So I'd like to remind you what Alvaro said up front. Anytime, and I see a few have coming through already, please use the chat function, either for questions, for observations, any points you want to make. I will be looking at that chat function as we're going along, and I'm bringing any points in as we're going along, or I'll be holding them back until the end. We'll be having a big chunk of the end for interactive discussion with everybody, for your questions, your observations, agreements, disagreements. This is what this is all about. But don't feel shy if you wish to raise a point during the conversation as well, and we'll bring it in. So let's get started. So Jill, if we could start with you. It's clear that men's voices are often missing from the conversation about equality. What has your research shown you that holds men back from getting involved?
It's particularly men who don't have any particular reason to be involved in inclusion, i.e. Because of their sexuality, because of their religion, because of their race. That's the silent majority by and large. And there are three real big reasons that my research indicates that men step back from their involvement. It's about relevance, it's about motivation, and it's about reluctance. So I'll say a little bit about relevance first. I think one of the things is Some don't see a problem. You can easily see problems with representation, but actually it's harder to see the greater challenges to career progress that are experienced by many colleagues because of who they are. And we need to address that by actually overcoming this lack of knowledge. Because as I said before, most people do believe that we act in a meritocratic way. And of course, we do our best. It's just some things we don't see because we don't experience them. The things that happen over time are things like women being less likely to be given high profile assignments, being more likely to be given the office housework, to be expected to provide more evidence of their competence than men, asked to represent their proposals again and again, or questioned more than men, giving exactly the same feedback about the same things. Being less likely to get airtime in meetings, more frequently interrupted, which of course means that you're not getting your point across, being less likely to be sponsored for career progression, more likely to be sidelined from the social networks that we all have that are incredibly important to accessing the unwritten rules and the gossip and what happens. And so all these things accumulate and really impact women's ability to progress and have equal access to opportunity. But actually, those things aren't generally talked about. And so if you don't know about them, you don't know why this is relevant to you, because most people, when they are aware of these issues, are really kind of want to intervene and want to do something or say something about these things when they're noticed. So that's the relevance issue. The motivation issue is really to do with us all being so busy and asked to do many things in this space. So I think it's really quite challenging to work out what it is that you can do. And I think others in this call will be speaking about the motivation and what we can do about that later on. But the third thing I wanted to talk about was the reluctance issue, because I think it's a really tricky one. I think there are two big things going on here. Even when men are supportive, they can often be concerned that they might be criticised by other women in particular, actually, for speaking out, that they might be accused of mansplaining at one end of the spectrum, or even worse, there is quite a bit of research evidence out there that suggests that there's more reticence to, for example, make efforts to sponsor women or to make efforts to increase your social networks with women, because there's a worry about being the source of office gossip and being thought that actually you're overstepping the line in some Me Too sexualized way. And it's difficult, all these thoughts are really quite difficult. And so actually, as all opening up the conversation and having it together, professionalizing the kind of relationships that we want to have with women at work and the sponsorship that we want to be doing are all really important. And I think it's also important that this work shouldn't be left to individuals. I mean, clearly we all have to do something differently, but actually we also need everybody in the organization, from the leaders down, particularly the leaders, to be role modeling, inviting people in every meeting that they attend or every big town hall that they do, inviting people to actually comment when they get things unintentionally wrong that make people feel excluded, inviting people to actually comment when they are accidentally sexist or accidentally racist. And equally important, reiterating many times the reasons why we need to act for inclusion and what specifically we need to do and what our expectations are of everyone. Because it's only by normalizing these conversations and making a lot of suggestions about what people do, which again we'll talk about more today, that we can actually start to make a difference for everybody. Because actually what we're talking about here is relative disadvantage. We all have relative disadvantage in some ways. So it's not just about women. I mean, it's a big deal because women have been excluded more than men. It's about all of us and all the ways in which we need to be treated seriously for the issues that we have in accessing as much opportunity as we want in our workplaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. I've got loads of questions I want to ask you, but I'm going to hold them back. I'm going to get Brian involved now and then wait for lots of... one thing I do want to say, and this is really cheeky of me, quoting some research to a researcher, But everyone on this call is self-select. Everyone realizes the huge importance of men being involved in the whole inclusion issues. So, that's true. But I do want, just as a reference point, because I like this article, there's a Harvard Business Review article back in October 2018 by Brad Johnson and David Smith called How Men Can Become Better Allies to Women. And there's a stat in there which I just really like. When men are deliberately engaged in, and this is specifically about gender inclusion programs, 96% of organizations see progress as compared with 30% when they're not deliberately engaged. There's a hugely important for men to become more engaged in this whole debate. I promise that's the only piece of research I will throw at Jill. But let's just talk to Brian about the other part of the issue that Jill parked, and let's come back to lots more questions around this. So Brian, how do you think are ways to encourage men to become more engaged?
Yeah, it's hard to follow, Jill. That was excellent. All the points you made. I'm trying to think how else I can build on that. I think as Jill mentioned, role model is really powerful. There's a question about what you can do. I think even if you're not a manager or in a leadership position, you can still role model, what it means to kind of speak up, to make interventions, to show up. And I think Jill and Gary have got more information about some of the kind of workshops that they do. I think the crux of it is like, what's in it for men? There's many of us who care about this topic and, want to make it a more equal place, but for many people, it's just not necessarily a priority for them. So, what's in it for men? And, Mark talked about stereotypes, and often, we look at stereotypes of different groups. There's some great work on stereotypes. Chimamanda Adichie, a Nigerian woman, did a TED talk about the single story, where a stereotype can compress someone to just a single story about them. And I think this is harmful for women, for people from different groups. I think it's also harmful for men. And I think there's stereotypes and tropes about men and masculinity, which I think kind of hold men back from getting involved in this. We're expected to be strong and tough and not be vulnerable, not talk about our feelings. When you look at the mental health and suicide rates among men, it's pretty shocking. And I think, we need to take this seriously and kind of open up the story about what it is to be a man. And, as we embrace that, I think that's going to get more men into this broader topic and feel they can talk about it. I personally went to an all-boys school from 11 to 18, and I don't necessarily thrive in that all-masculine environment. And I don't want to, I see that sometimes in workplace environments, and it just doesn't suit me. Doesn't suit me kind of fitting into that masculine trope. So I personally work better in more diverse teams, just from a selfish perspective. So it's not always doing this for women or for other groups. I think it's a better working environment and more innovative, sometimes harder, sometimes more challenging with different points of view and backgrounds. But I think it's, personally better for men, better for business as well.
Thank you, Brian. And you actually, you answered part of the question that Tom's put in the chat, which is, lots of men want to get involved, don't know quite how to do that. And we're going to spend the next part of this meeting talking very specifically about that. But one of the points I think is quite interesting is the point you made, which is everybody, doesn't matter what seniority they have, they can be role modeling. I've always said that every person is a leader, irrespective of where they are hierarchically in the organization. I think this is exactly the same point. So as we get to the next part of the discussion, I'd like us to make sure that we just bring in some of that out as well. And Terry, lovely to see you on the meeting, Terry. Terry makes a point that actually, you sometimes find female bosses are doing exactly the same sorts of things that male bosses do, interrupting, et cetera, and I think we've all seen that. I think that's true. But when you've got 4 times as many or 5 times as many or 10 times as many male bosses than you have female bosses in organizations, then it becomes seen as a male issue. But I do agree that leadership, there isn't good enough leadership full stop that we have, particularly in organizations where leaders become leaders because their technical skills and not because of actually their people-related skills are often not looked at. So perhaps we come back to that a little bit more as well. But to actually just move into that discussion, Gary, can we bring you into specifically around how men can actually be more effective, what Men for Inclusion can do actually to be supportive of this. So if you look at the organisation perspective of this, so what I know a really important part of Men for Inclusion is to be able to support organisations who want their male talent to be more effective allies for equality. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, John. I mean, I think the overriding message with this, and I think it's coming out of some of the stuff we're seeing in the chat, is maybe sort of helping organizations get a culture where having, difficult conversations becomes a little bit easier, right? So I think a lot of it is about creating the kind of environment where those traditionally tough conversations could begin to be explored. And I think there are three kind of key areas that come with that, and I think this does also reflect a lot of the stuff that's in the book that we wrote. The first is very much the research that, say, Jill has done around the female experience. So and finding opportunities within an organization to identify similar challenges. And the work we've done so far suggests that many companies have exactly the same challenge for their female staff, that they experience all the things that Jill described earlier, and they maybe don't realize it. The women don't always realize it, and certainly the men don't. So first of all, there's this kind of discovery piece and enabling that to be uncovered. The second thing, to your point, John, is really how do you get men engaged? And I think that takes several flavors. So how do you get them into the conversation, but doing it in a way that doesn't make it feel like they have to feel really guilty. This is not about having to provide remedial training. It's more about bringing them into the conversation and really trying to get them to articulate their views on this, and try to make it about how can we begin to find solutions to this collectively. And then obviously kind of related to that is to enable those traditionally difficult conversations with men and women together. So they begin to build a better shared understanding of the environment they're working in. And then finally, to the question or the point that Tom made and we've been making, is we try to give some people some really practical ideas of things they can do as individuals. So there might be things around how you think about hiring, how you create better sort of like social interactions, how you run meetings in an inclusive fashion, how you think about career development and promotion practices, even all the way down to how you think about how you incentivize people, but things that people can change in the way that they operate. And Jill and I have started recently experimenting, I would say, with deliberately running almost like role-playing type workshops where people look at, so what do you do if you find something you're uncomfortable with? How do you call that out? What language should you use? How should you do it in a way that's still inclusive? And more importantly, if you are called out, because we recognize that everyone still makes mistakes. We are all accidental sexists. We can't help it. We've been culturally conditioned to do that. So when you're called out, how do you respond in a way that is helpful to the organization? And maybe it's about how you chair meetings and how you deal with interruptions and how you step in on behalf of others when you see them being excluded in some way. So we'd like to be very practical, because I do think people want to have things that they can personally do differently.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you. I'm just going to pick up on that very last point. I mean, I was privileged enough to be a partner at PwC for a quarter of a century, and I was always making mistakes, and I was always stumbling over myself. And one of my brave managers said to me one day, "John, you need to make a virtue of this." Because I'm quite an outspoken person, said, you need to be really clear. You're not only given permission to call you out openly in public, you expect them to do that, and your response to them calling you out is absolutely critical. It needs to be embracing at the time. And I found it really difficult to start with, but as it actually became a bit of a joke. People didn't need to say anything in the end. They just laughed, and I thought, oh God, I've done it again. I'm sorry. And then we moved on. And I think for particularly those, and I say everyone's a leader. Everyone's a leader in the organisation, doesn't matter how senior you are. I think it's really important to get comfortable being called out and expect it of everybody, and that in itself creates a little bit more of an open environment as well, which I think is really important.
Totally.
Mark, can I turn to you? Gary talked a little bit about organisations. I'm sure there's a number of people on the call, particularly a number of men on this meeting, who are thinking, well, I personally want to get more involved. I personally want to learn more, but my organisation, perhaps I'm not confident enough at the moment, or indeed, dare I say, the organisation perhaps isn't as welcoming for me to actually to be more active. And indeed, one of the questions, and I apologise for forgetting who asked it in the chat, was saying, actually, sometimes it's just not easy for the company to raise points in the company because you get bashed down. And so how can an individual who wants to get involved and get more supported to be better ally and for inclusion get involved, Mark? And what Unit Men Conclusion do to actually support them?
Thank you, John. So just making sure I was off mute, and I am, which is probably a first. Lots of questions coming there in the chat. Is sort of how, and what. At Men for Inclusion, one of the things we're doing is opening up not just our corporate services, but we're opening up membership for individual men or groups of men from firms who wants to partake in this, wants to have the discussion, wants a safe and confidential place to meet and have guided conversations around the topics. So I'd welcome everybody to come and join, become a member. If you want to just dip your toe in the water, every other week we are putting on Tuesday evenings, 6 o'clock, events which are guided discussions, and a whole range of topics already planned from, when you hear that's because she needs more gravitas, what do you say? So helping people call out and support other, support women and other minority groups. She's your colleague, let's make sure she's safe. How to ensure our female colleagues are safe in the workplace and safe when they're at work. And then a really important one, how to be an ally to women of colour, recognising specific needs there. Moving on from that, in June, we've got an event which is what's in it for me, and recognising, talking about the, as we talked about earlier, the benefits of inclusivity to men and what we've gained through the work of others over the years. So I'd welcome everybody to come and join and register for those up and coming events if this is of interest to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. We deliberately have kept this part of the meeting quite confined, so we've got a really good chunk now to specifically talk of the specific points that anyone has. I'm just going to pick up, there's a couple of that we haven't picked up already. I'm going to pick those up to start it, and I've got a lot of questions I want to ask if no one else does, but I'm hoping I won't be out of time to get to those. A great point around incompetent leaders. When you've got over 3/4 of leadership in this country in business who are men, and we see incompetent leadership all over the place, but it seems that there's a much lower bar for men to become a leader and allow themselves to be an incompetent leader than there is for women. And I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. And I could sort of shrug and say, we can't change the system of incompetence because it's just ingrained in the whole of this country. What we can do is to drive for greater objectivity that over time replaces incompetent leaders. I think the objectivity point is actually really important, and everyone has a role. Everybody has a role, for actually doing that, which I think is really important. I want to pick up this other point, and maybe Jill, if I can put it to you, if I may, because it's come up several times, which is this point around feeling comfortable, whether you're a man or a woman, but particularly if you're a woman, feeling comfortable call out in public, with the risk of being branded as an activist and it's only a woman again. But as a man, the point you made when you first started talking, often men feel they're being sort of branded, as that sort of person as well. Can you just say a little bit more about that issue and what are the sort of things that people can think about to get people more comfortable and create that safer environment?
I will, yes. There's an interesting piece of research that was done quite recently that looked at the impact on people who do start to call out things quite vociferously in terms of inclusion. And there's no doubt that there is punishment that's attached to anybody who does this, apart, interestingly, from white men. They were the only people whose career progress and whose assessments were unaffected by this. I'm sure that that's not always true, but actually it's one of the reasons why it's really important, I think, for men to talk to other men, because it's more surprising, and also actually it's less risky than a woman or anybody who feels that they have been a victim of discrimination in some way or excluded in some way, raising the issue for themselves. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is there is no doubt that these are really uncomfortable conversations. And as Gary was saying a little bit earlier, one of the things that we've been trying to help with is actually running workshops through organisations so that everybody is armed with the ability to recognise these smaller things to call out, which actually feel a lot safer than calling out sexual harassment and things that need very different ways of dealing with them. So actually coaching about what to say and how to say it, and hopefully when everybody has the same experience and the same kind of language, it's easier to start practicing that. So one of the things that we recommend is that you team up with people kind of overtly, and have somebody watching your back. So in meetings, for example, have somebody intervene when you're the person that's interrupted or talked over, so to open up a space in the conversation for you to come back in, because it's really hard to do that for yourself. But if somebody else does that and says, that's really interesting, Brian, that additional point you were making, but I don't think that Louisa had finished her point. Louisa, would you like to say more? So language like that, and the specific language that gives you a start, so that it's like learning a script. So you've got one or two ideas about how you can start a conversation. We think that that's a useful place to be. And we talk about that in the book, The Accidental Sexist, which is out very soon. And we also talk about that in workshops. So making it more normalized and giving everybody permission and encouragement to start to call out these issues is one of the things that we'll suggest. We also coach a little bit about, in the same sessions, about how to have difficult conversations, because you might be able to call out in the moment, or you might feel better about sticking a pin in the conversation and saying, I feel uncomfortable about that. Can I come back to you later? Which gives you time to think about what you're going to say. And also, because you've publicly said you're going to do that, it makes it more likely that you do. And also, if you ask permission of the person that you want to call out to do that, they generally give permission. It's very rare for people to say, no, you can't talk to me about that, because usually when people have said or done something wrong, they haven't really thought about what it is that they're doing. So actually going back and then having some tools about how to frame the conversation, that's something that we have some specific ideas about as well. So again, we've got scripts for that we work out on in the workshops, and we have in the book. And then we also have tried to plug the other hole, which is, what do you do or say when you're the one that's been called out? Someone on the chat quite rightly called out that I didn't use Louisa Golden and Tracy Abieta's surnames when I mentioned them, and that's me being called out, and I'm trying to put that right now. But what you say and do to not get defensive, to not be defensive and not make the person who's actually calling out this issue feel a lot worse or feel punished for what they're doing, that's the other side of the equation as well. So just a few things about that. And someone has asked if I could provide a link to the research on the impacts of calling out. Yes, I could do that. Great.
If you could put that into the chat, that'd be great. I just want to pick up on this calling out, and actually I call it pairing up. I just give a little personal experience of this. I'm somewhat ashamed, embarrassed to say, I didn't realise this was a really powerful tool until I was appointed to PwC Global Leadership Team. And these are really senior people, obviously, and many of them have been in place. You will not be surprised to know at the time, this was 10 years ago, every single one of them was a white man, and most of them were Anglo-Saxon. And I was somewhat in awe. I was fairly senior myself. I was somewhat of awe of these people, and I was really struggling to get my voice heard. And the global banking leader, a guy called Bob, who was a brilliant guy, came up to me in one of the breaks of the first session. He said, John, why aren't you saying anything? I mean, what's going on here? This isn't you. Why are you not saying anything? And I said, Bob, I just can't, I'm not comfortable interrupting people and contradicting. He goes, right, that's it. I'm going to do it for you, which was brilliant, right? And so he did exactly that, right? Throughout the afternoon. In fact, he got a bit of a laugh because he was making the point over and over again. And, he was saying, well, wait a minute, John's the expert. He's a people expert here. Why we don't, John, what's your view on this particular point, rather than us give our views? And it was brilliant that he paired up on that. And over time, of course, that wasn't required more and more, but that was a fantastic thing. As in this case, a very senior leader stepping in and pairing up. And of course, I'm pleased to say I took that on board myself, and actually deliberately went and paired myself up with other people, offered myself to other people. I must admit, the vast majority of those were women. And it's shameful that a room full of men listen to men more than the women, but it is true. Until a man can start opening up the conversation, until the woman is more comfortable doing it. So I would really advocate every single person on this call to start pairing up to support each other, particularly the men doing so with women. I think that's just really, really critical. Thank you, Jill. I think some super points. I'm gonna have to stop so I can read some of the points here, but I just want to bring Mark, if I can bring you in, Mark. There's this whole point around, can we just quickly go back to incompetence, because there's more points come through here around incompetence, and how much of this issue, in your view, is a leadership issue, i.e. poor leadership, and how much of it is actually to do with men having ingrained biases and actually having to deal with those?
John, I think it's a brilliant question, and I think it's a really hard one to answer. Clearly, there are some brilliant leaders out there, and leadership training these days is all about being inclusive. But against a backdrop of that, we have the challenges of our own biases. I've been working in this sector for 20 years, as I say, and I'm still called out today. I have to say I love being called out because it helps me improve, it helps me understand. But I do think as well there's a lot of ignorance out there about the topics. There's a lot of people who think it's not about them, it's not for them, it's about minorities. And clearly it's not, it's about us all. And we need to learn, we need to improve, we need to be more supportive, because it's good for us. It gives us more choice and more opportunity. Just like your point about when you felt maybe that you were the odd one out or the only one in that meeting at PwC. I'm sure as well, everybody in the room here today can remember a time when they were the only one in the room, and that everybody else may have looked similar to them. They may have been in a group of men, but they felt in some way different. And if we remember how that felt and how it feels, we can learn from that about how other people might feel in the room, and improve because of it.
Thank you. Gary, I'm going to give you a 1 minute warning here. So I'm going to ask you to come in on a question, because you're the guy here that's got a huge amount of financial service experience, and a specific FS question here, but it's beyond just financial services. Because it is true, when you look beyond, all particularly large organizations, there's this question about whether senior leaders really take the whole of these issues seriously enough. And the example that's given, we give lots of other examples, but the example that was given here, which was by Jonathan Heim, was very much around D&I leaders often, nearly always, report through to HR, do not report directly to CEO. The whole inclusion agenda is not a regular item on board meetings. to me, it actually goes much more fundamental than that, which is any other business critical issue. You have the data, you've analyzed it, you put teams together, you've got the resources, including money, you've got metrics, whereas in this whole inclusion space, that's not the case for virtually any organization. And this whole issue here about men, which is what we're talking about here for inclusion, there are very few organizations who actually have a focus specifically on actually bringing men into and getting them comfortable in an environment like they do for women. Whether that's about expanding their women's networks into a gender balanced network, or whether that's like what you did at JP Morgan, which is really forming Mad Allies. If you could pick out of my ramble some points there that you'd like to make some observations and some tips, that'd be really useful, Gary.
Yeah, John, I've written down 3 things, probably in a result of a couple of the questions I saw from both Tracy and from Jordan, of things I think companies possibly need to think about. And to your point, I'm absolutely with you. I think most boards recognise the data is overwhelming of the benefits they get from a more balanced, inclusive workforce. But it doesn't seem to add up in terms of investment in time and investment in money, right? And to your point, if it is I think companies need to make it a strategic priority for the firm, and therefore just as important as strategic priorities they have for risk and for finance and for product development and for sales and marketing. So I think that absolutely needs to happen. But more broadly, I think one of the challenges companies have is and back to maybe our kind of middle managers that are kind of like in the midst of all of this all the time, is to try not to overwhelm people with D&I as like one more thing to do on the side of the desk, and make it more about how you align to the values of the organization. So you make it a more values-driven conversation. So there's a values kind of stream that infuses the whole company. And this is one of the things you do as part of demonstrating that the values are important and people should be giving up time for it. And the second point with that, I think, John, is aligning incentives in some way. And there's many clunky ways you could do this. Paying people for how many women they hire. I've seen companies try that. I'm not a big fan of that particular idea, but people that incentivize the right behaviors, I think, is a really powerful way you can go about doing this. So one of the companies we've come across deliberately measure people's inclusion attributes. So some sort of 360 review of every manager or leader that measures how inclusive they are. And they then align their incentive structure that basically pays people based around how well they score on those measures. So that incentive alignment and aligning to the values of the corporation, I think both of those are really important. And this other point that I think Tracy made, or maybe that was Jordan as well, about where D&I sits, I feel this has to be business-led. I think this has to be a business-led strategic imperative. It can't be an HRD thing on the side. It can't be, the D&I problem. It's like hashtag everyone's problem type thing. Business leaders have to take accountability.
Thank you, Gary. Brian, a heads up, I'm going to ask you about this whole point about business leaders have to take priority. And indeed, Gary used the point about it has to be a strategic priority. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about this question. I really want your comments on everyone on this call, everyone in the organization, and particularly men. Surely we need to make our personal strategic priority to be better allies, to be better at this. And if you agree with that, then how do you start making that a more important priority as an individual? Just pause there for a second. I just want to pick up on one other point, because hopefully this little anecdote will make people laugh a little bit, and we need a bit of humor in this subject. There's a point here around, I think it might have been Jordan who raised this point around this disconnect. Senior leaders say, yeah, we get this as hugely important. We need to be an inclusive organization. We need greater diversity. And they genuinely believe it. And then they say, well, we run a meritocracy. All the promotions in this business is a meritocracy. A few years ago, I did a piece of research while I was at PwC around diversity in the travel industry. And I was presenting this to a whole group of CEOs. And we had asked exactly these questions. And so, are you a meritocracy, through your promotion, etc. And we asked a lot of other questions around data. And so we had a point that said 86% or something, over 80% of CEOs said our promotion processes are a meritocracy, right? And less than 18% it was, I remember it stuck in my brain, just under 18% of those same organizations did not collect the data of promotions to cut that by anything you like, right? Gender, by ethnicity, by social mobility, didn't collect any of that data, didn't even collect the data to do any correlations between assessment rankings and promotions, nothing. So so it's great that you think it's meritocracy. You're either a bunch of idiots or you're liars because of this. You don't have the information. So what it actually demonstrates is that you're ingrained biases and you have to open up the conversation. Thank you for humoring me and allowing me to tell that story. Brian, your point around your feelings around this whole point around people, individuals making it a strategic priority.
Yeah, there's so many different great points, and I was kind of responding to one about being business-led. But I think, something that you've mentioned a couple of times is about getting men comfortable with this, getting more people comfortable with this, and I think that's the problem. It's not comfortable, and we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You mentioned Anglo-Saxons. Just thinking about some of the Scots, like Walter Scott and David Hume, they think comfortableness is very English kind of thing, but I think it's discomfort is where we're going to make steps forward. It's when you're called out. I was called out yesterday, for eating on camera on the first day of Ramadan in front of international colleagues, and I should have known better than to do that. I get called out when someone says a manager is a he, and I say or she, and someone else says or they. In a non-binary kind of world. So yeah, the more even as you step in, you're getting called out all the time, and this is those moments when you get bruised. That's when you're going to learn. You can either retreat and get defensive, or you think, perfect, this is how I'm going to learn and how I'm going to grow. Just like with personal exercise, it's when you work out and when you stretch your muscles, that's when you get stronger, not by sitting on the armchair. So this is a space where, get out of the comfort zone, get into discomfort, think about your values. There's a great work by Brené Brown on looking at your values, and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's how you're going to grow. It's not easy. No one's necessarily going to thank you in this space. But if that's what your values are, that's what's important, then you need to make it a strategic priority.
Thank you, Brian. Mark, can I just turn to you of a connected point that's being raised here? We all need to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and some people are, actually, it's in their DNA, but actually the vast majority of people are not. And so having support mechanisms to help each other be comfortable with being uncomfortable, having to release vows. You've just been called out and you're feeling I'm uncomfortable about that, and I need to release that, really understand that, and having a friend there beside you to be able to have those conversations. I know this is something that you feel quite strongly about the support mechanisms. Mark, could you just talk a little bit more about the support mechanisms, and indeed perhaps the way in which Men for Inclusion can help that, but just generally as well?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and there's a lady on the call here who I was talking to last week who said to me, listen, I'm fed up with being trained, coached and mentored to succeed in a man's world. Shouldn't we be putting our efforts into making sure that we all succeed in an inclusive world? And that is about mutual support. It's about mutual understanding. It's about having conversations. It's about calling people out and being open to being called out to change. Brian gave a great example there. We've got to learn. We've got to be told when we're making other people feel uncomfortable, just as we tell other people when we're being uncomfortable or being made to feel uncomfortable. And I think the inclusive conversations, the inclusive conversation events that we're putting on are designed to take these topics one by one. Let's have a conversation about them. Let's understand the challenges and help us to understand the lived experiences of other people within our business. And we need to have those conversations. It's the only way we'll move forward.
Thank you, Mark. Jill, I'd just like to come to you a bit more about this lived experience point. We've talked a bit about some of the micro points here about being more comfortable calling out, talking over meetings and so on. It seems to me that inherent in all this is the commitment as individuals to learn, the commitment to be educated around what are the lived experience of the people that are not like you and frankly are in the minority and being squashed, and really understand that, and therefore be able to adapt your own behaviours through learnings. But this point around listening and empathy and really learning, could you just say something around how that learning process can, what can be most effective, and some of the ways in which, frankly, more the men in this call particularly can actually really raise their awareness and therefore get more comfortable because it's from a foundation of knowledge?
I think it's a great point. And I think things like diversity dialogues, actually having conversations about, so people share their experiences. But we need to remember that men and women often start in very different places here. So quite often what you need is a lot of the conversations that have been going on between women, and particularly women of colour recently, those to be shared with men. And I think, yeah, there's something wonderful about being curious and wanting to learn about this, because most of us kind of get on pretty well with or want to get on pretty well with our colleagues, and actually asking these kind of questions and being a bit more human about our understanding is generally a positive thing. And it's, given that we all chat anyway, it's not a big stretch to just have more conversations about some of the ways in which people experience your workplace in a different way to you. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing that builds on a point that somebody made earlier, that what we don't need, I think it was Gary, what we don't need is a lot of extra things to do, because we're all super busy anyway. So when we're having social events, if you have in mind what I really want to do is extend my network here, actually, in breakout rooms or whatever, actually pairing yourself with someone that isn't like you and being conscious of that, you end up just having more better conversations about it. Or if you've got a brainstorming event to do at work, invite people that you wouldn't normally include. So the additional benefit of that is you start to get to know other people. So I think if we're all a bit smarter about how can we meet our objectives of getting to know other people better in the course of our everyday work and the things that we need to do anyway, I think that would be one piece of practical advice I could give.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. I'm going to give all of the speakers the 5-minute warning. So I'm going to take a couple of other points. I'm going to come back to each of you, and you've got a minute and no more than a minute. In fact, you've got 30 seconds just to do your one takeaway each that you'd like to highlight. So just be prepared for that. I just want to pick up, it's from James. You'll notice, everybody, that I called everyone by their first name and never their last names, because by the time I've said the first name, I've forgotten the last name. That's my poor brain, the way it works. James, thank you. It's this point around calling out, etc., and not looking like you've been picking holes. I just want to reiterate a couple of points that were made before. One of those is that oftentimes someone else doing the calling out for you can actually be really, really powerful. The most important thing, and particularly for those people on this meeting who are more senior, it's really important to role model calling out. It's really important. It's I remember one of my fellow partners called out our chairman in an open meeting once, and it was only obvious to me afterwards that the chair had asked him to do it. It sort of set up, but leaving the fact it was set up to one side for one moment, it's really important for people to role model calling out, to normalize it. It's actually part of the culture that we do that. It's for positive reasons. It's not about trying to pick holes. It's so that everyone can learn and everyone can understand the impact, which I think is a really, really important point. Enough of me. Right, I'm gonna go to Brian first, if I can. Brian, your 60 seconds of the last things you want to say at the end of this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a lot of questions about what are the practical things we can do. How can we call people out in an acceptable way that's not get us into trouble? And I think, with Men for Inclusion, there's a lot of workshops, a lot of practical advice on how to do that. I think going deeper than that, though, I've just been doing this Dare to Lead program with Brene Brown, and I think what it comes down to is what's really holding you back. And it's not necessarily the practical tips; it's sometimes just that fear. The fear that you're going to cause offence, you're going to shame someone. Potentially, it could hamper your career to do these things. So it's about kind of leaning into courage and about this is going to be a scary thing to do, and the more I do it and the more practice I get, it's going to get easier. But it's sometimes just being brave for 20 seconds and just trying it out, calling someone out, like, I don't think you should finish that point, or let's go back to what Dr. Jill Armstrong was saying on that point, or or even different dimensions of diversity. So I really encourage people to lead into courageous leadership. And one of the first times I called things out at Amazon, I got called into the HR director's office, which was quite a tough conversation, at the end of which he said, sounds like you're passionate about this. Let's look at some projects we can get you involved in. So, putting yourself out there, is scary, but it can lead to positive outcomes and a good path forward.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Gary, can we have your last words?
Yeah, John, so I think the key thing I kind of want to get across is maybe, again, a very personal thing for me. When I got involved in this subject and I got involved in being part of it, I was very uncomfortable when I started, right? And I found myself in a room with 50 women talking about stuff that I knew nothing about, right? Frankly, their experience, which had been completely invisible to me. And that took me on a journey, and it took me on a very personal, powerful one. And I think I've learned more and I was quite a senior leader at the time when I started this. I've learned more in the last 5-6 years than I'd ever learned before about how to lead, manage, partner, and grow and develop people around me in the workplace. And I think it helped me become a better manager, a better leader, a better friend, a better parent, a better husband, a better human being. And I would urge every man on this call today to go through a similar learning experience, because I am sure you will find it beneficial for you.
Gary, that's fabulous, and that resonates hugely with me, by the way. There's a point, but you haven't have time now to address this, but it just really comes off from what you said, which I think Tom has risen around the whole zero-sum game point. Many people believe that it's a zero-sum game. So if let's say women are going to get a better deal, then some men are going to suffer. I actually don't believe that's true, partly for what Gary's just said. It depends the way you look at who's benefiting and how people benefit. But I think, Mark, in particular, I think that's a particular topic for one of the Men for Inclusion sessions in the future, which I think is so tune into that. And Mark, please, let's turn to you for your final words.
I'm just going to read what Tracy has said in the chat. This has been a great discussion and really amazing to see so many men sharing their views on this topic. Men for Inclusion are on to something very powerful, making the agenda of D&I an inclusive one. We need men to help create a more equitable future. Everybody out there, come and join us. Let's head towards that finishing line together.
Thank you, Mark. And quite appropriately, last word to the researcher, to Jill.
I think pick one thing to do and do it. So say I'm going to be an ally by starting every meeting by saying I'm going to run this in an inclusive way, or by picking up in your next meeting when someone has been talked over and giving them space to talk, or by challenging someone who, when discussing the assessment of another individual, says something like, they're not showing enough gravitas, or they're not showing enough confidence, and pick apart what people really mean by that. So pick one thing and give it a go.
Brilliant advice. Thank you very much. We've come to the end. Thank you enormously for everybody. A hugely engaged session. Could have gone on for another hour. Mark, do you just want to just highlight and to point everyone in the right direction for how they continue to get involved?
Yeah, thank you, John. And thank you for your facilitation, by the way. Absolutely brilliant as normal. Listen, have a look at the website. The links are in the chat there. There's events coming up. You can come and join membership. Or if you want to get your whole firm involved, come and have a chat with us and we can talk about our corporate services. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.